You have 48 hours to sign it over, my father said. Your sister is taking the mill. For several seconds, the only sound between us was the low hum of the restored water turbine beneath the polished floor. Around us, customers moved between the bakery, the artisan studios, and the glass-walled event hall I had spent 6 years building out of a collapsing textile factory. 2 of my employees stopped beside the reception desk. They had heard every word. I stared at my father. You haven't stepped inside this place since Mom died. Richard Carter adjusted the cuffs of his expensive coat and glanced toward the crowded courtyard, as though he were inspecting property he already owned. That isn't relevant. It's very relevant. His mouth tightened. Vanessa can take this business further than you ever could. That was when something inside me shifted. I stepped closer and lowered my voice. The mill isn't yours to give her. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did. For the first time since he walked in, he looked uncertain. Years earlier, at my mother's will reading, my sister had received the beachfront villa our relatives had admired for decades. White stone terraces, private access to the shore, furniture included. I received an abandoned textile mill with broken windows, a leaking roof, and weeds growing through the loading dock. Vanessa had laughed before the attorney finished speaking. Well, she said, sliding the villa photographs toward herself, at least Loraine got something. My father called the mill a pile of collapsing bricks. An uncle offered to help me sell it for scrap. Everyone treated my inheritance like proof that my mother had valued me less. I had believed them. Still, I kept the property. Now the old mill employed 42 people. Its workshops had waiting lists. Weddings were booked 11 months ahead. Local newspapers had called it the most successful historic restoration in the county. My father had never congratulated me. He had simply appeared that morning and demanded everything. What makes you think Vanessa has any claim here? I asked. He picked up the leather folder he had placed on the counter. Because family assets should be controlled by someone capable of protecting them. I almost laughed. You mean someone you can control? Several employees looked away. My father leaned toward me. Refuse, and every person in this family will know you chose money over them. Then he walked toward the entrance. At the door he stopped without turning around. Vanessa will be here tomorrow, he said. After she arrives you won't have a choice. The doors closed behind him. And one question followed me through the silent lobby. What did my father believe he knew about my mill that I did? The first time my father asked me to sell the mill, I had owned it for less than a week. You're being sentimental, he said across his desk. The building is unsafe, the land is useless, and the repairs will bury you. He pushed an offer toward me. It was barely enough to cover the property taxes. I looked at the figure. Who made this offer? That doesn't matter. It matters to me. Richard leaned back. Take the money before everyone realizes your mother left you a liability. That word stayed with me. Liability. Vanessa preferred another phrase. My villa is the real inheritance, she told me at a family dinner, loud enough for our cousins to hear. The mill was probably Mom's way of giving Loraine a project. Everyone laughed. I smiled because I still believed that if I worked hard enough, they would eventually stop seeing me as the daughter who received the leftovers. Instead of selling, I used my savings to stabilize the east wall. I spent nights reviewing old engineering plans and weekends clearing debris with hired crews I could barely afford. Then the roof over the dye room failed during a storm. The bank rejected my first renovation loan. A contractor walked away halfway through the foundation work. Each setback gave my father another reason to call. Ready to be practical, he asked. No. Months later, his offer increased. Then it increased again. He never explained why anyone wanted a property he claimed was worthless. By the 4th year, the first cafe opened inside the restored weaving hall. Artists rented studios upstairs. Historical tour began selling out on Saturdays. When the local paper featured the mill on its front page, my father called the same afternoon. Business looks temporary, he said. I looked through my office window at a courtyard full of customers. Then why do you keep trying to buy it? He hung up. That evening, my finance manager, Elena, entered my office carrying a printed email. Loraine, she said, your father has copies of our revenue reports. I took the pages from her. They included occupancy rates, vendor contracts, and projections that had never been made public. My hands tightened around the paper. Who gave him access to this? Vanessa arrived the next morning just before 10. She climbed out of a white luxury SUV wearing oversized sunglasses and a bright smile that reminded me of the day our mother's will had been read. Only this time, she wasn't looking at an abandoned building. She was looking at a thriving business. Guests filled the courtyard cafe. A wedding planner was walking a couple through the restored ballroom. Local artisans greeted customers from their storefronts, while tour groups wandered beneath the preserved timber beams. Vanessa slowly removed her sunglasses. I have to admit, she said, looking around, you finally made it presentable. I folded my arms. I wasn't aware I needed your approval. She smiled. You won't, it'll be mine soon. Before I could answer, 3 black SUVs rolled into the parking lot. My father stepped out first. Behind him came 2 attorneys, several relatives, and a handful of investors I recognized from regional development projects. The conversations around the courtyard gradually stopped. Every employee looked toward us. Richard didn't lower his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, thank you for coming. There will soon be a transition in ownership. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. Vanessa walked to his side as though they had rehearsed the moment. We appreciate everyone's support, she said confidently. The business will continue under experienced leadership. I stared at both of them. Experienced leadership. My father pointed directly at me. Loraine built this because of the Carter family reputation. Investors trusted our name. One of my longtime tenants frowned. Actually, he interrupted, I leased here because of Loraine. Richard ignored him. This property belongs with the successful child, he continued. Vanessa understands luxury development. She'll maximize its value. Several relatives nodded immediately. One aunt sighed dramatically. Loraine, she said, don't tear this family apart over a building. Another cousin added, you've already proven yourself. Why not let Vanessa take it from here? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I spent 6 years rebuilding this place, I said evenly. Where were all of you when the roof collapsed, when I couldn't afford payroll, when I was cleaning debris by myself? Nobody answered. Richard reached into his briefcase and placed a thick folder on a nearby table. Sign the transfer today. No. His voice hardened. You don't seem to understand. I understand perfectly. No, he replied, you don't. One of the attorneys standing behind him shifted uncomfortably. As the discussion grew louder, he quietly stepped beside me. Ms. Carter, he whispered, making sure no one else could hear, may I speak with you privately? I nodded. We walked several steps away from the crowd. He lowered his voice even further. When your mother's estate was settled, there were supplemental documents placed under restricted instruction. I blinked. What documents? I've never seen their contents. What do they say? I don't know. He glanced toward Richard, who was still speaking confidently with the investors. The instructions were very specific. They were never opened during probate. A chill ran through me. If no one has seen them. He nodded slowly. Then neither your father nor your sister knows what's inside. Before I could ask another question, Richard called across the courtyard. Loraine. Everyone turned toward us. You have until tomorrow morning. He looked around deliberately, making sure every employee, customer, investor, and relative was listening. If you refuse to cooperate, my attorneys will begin legal proceedings. The crowd slowly dispersed, whispering among themselves. Some looked sympathetic. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Vanessa walked past me wearing the same confident smile she'd arrived with. "I told you," she said quietly, "this was always supposed to be mine." She climbed into her SUV and drove away. Nearly everyone had left when a courier vehicle pulled into the parking lot. The driver stepped out carrying a large sealed envelope. "Delivery for Ms. Loraine Carter." He checked my identification before handing it over. Across the front in bold type was the name of the law firm that had handled my mother's estate 6 years earlier. The envelope was sealed with a bright red stamp. "To be OPNED only BY LORINE Carter." I carried the envelope into my office and locked the door behind me. For a long moment I simply stared at it. The red seal hadn't been broken. No fingerprints. No handwritten notes. Just my name and the instruction that only I was allowed to open it. Outside my window, I could see employees pretending to work while quietly watching my office. They all knew something was wrong. I slid a letter opener beneath the seal. Inside were several neatly organized folders, rolled property surveys, certified deeds, and a handwritten envelope addressed in my mother's unmistakable script. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. "My dearest Loraine," it began. "If you are reading this, then someone has finally decided your mill is worth taking." I stopped breathing for a second. She had known. Every page after that made my father's behavior over the past 6 years fall into place. Along with the letter were maps dating back nearly 30 years. My mother hadn't simply owned the abandoned textile mill. Quietly, over decades, she had purchased neighboring industrial parcels whenever they became available. Most people assumed they belonged to different owners because they had never been developed. In reality, they had all been transferred into the same protected estate. I spread the surveys across my conference table. The boundaries stretched far beyond the mill itself. Then I found another document. A planning report. It detailed approved development rights that dramatically increased the property's future value if the surrounding district were ever revitalized. Someone had recently discovered exactly what those rights were worth. Suddenly, every conversation with my father made perfect sense. His increasingly generous offers, his sudden appearance after years of silence, his insistence that Vanessa should own the property. None of it was about family. It was about land. And not just the mill. Everything surrounding it. I continued reading. Another certified document caught my attention. It specifically named my father. "Richard Carter shall have no authority to manage, transfer, negotiate, encumber, or otherwise exercise control over the mill property or any associated parcels." The language couldn't have been clearer. My mother had intentionally removed him from every decision involving the property. I leaned back in my chair. "So that's why you're panicking," I whispered. He hadn't come because I had become successful. He had come because someone finally calculated what the entire estate was actually worth. A knock interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called. My estate attorney, Margaret Ellis, stepped inside carrying her laptop. "I received your message," she said. I turned the documents toward her. "You need to see these." She carefully reviewed the deeds, the surveys, and my mother's letter. When she reached the final page, she looked up at me with quiet admiration. "Your mother planned for this." I think she expected my father to try exactly what he's doing. Margaret nodded. She did more than expect it. She tapped one of the legal filings. She built protections specifically to prevent it. I exhaled slowly. "So what happens now?" "We stop reacting." She closed the folder. "We let the facts speak." I looked once more at my mother's letter before carefully placing everything back into the envelope. "I don't want another private argument." "You shouldn't have one," Margaret agreed. "We'll settle this where everyone hears the same truth." That afternoon, she contacted the original estate law firm and reserved their largest conference room. Formal invitations were delivered to my father, Vanessa, and every attorney involved in the inheritance. No accusations, no arguments, just one meeting, one opportunity, one complete review of my mother's estate documents. By the following morning, I stood outside the conference room beside Margaret. Through the glass walls, I watched relatives file into their seats. Investors arrived shortly afterward. Even a few business partners my father had brought to the mill took places along the back wall. The atmosphere was tense but controlled. Margaret looked at me. "Are you ready?" I nodded. "I've been ready for 6 years." Before we could open the conference room door, the elevator chimed. Every head turned. Vanessa stepped out wearing a tailored cream-colored suit and the same confident smile she had worn at the mill. She glanced at me, smiled even wider, and said, "I hope you've already signed the papers." Then she walked into the room as though victory was already hers. The conference room fell silent as the estate attorney entered, carrying a thick leather file. No one spoke. My father sat at the head of the table beside Vanessa, looking as confident as he had the day before. Several investors he had invited leaned forward expectantly. A few relatives exchanged quiet smiles, convinced they were about to watch me surrender the business I had spent 6 years rebuilding. Margaret Ellis, my attorney, placed my mother's sealed documents on the table. "The purpose of today's meeting," she said calmly, "is not to negotiate ownership." My father frowned. "It's exactly why we are here." She met his eyes. "No, Mr. Carter, ownership was settled years ago." He leaned back in his chair. "We'll see about that." The estate attorney, Charles Whitmore, finally opened the original estate file. "I believe it's time we review the instructions your late wife left regarding the mill." He carefully removed a handwritten letter. "I'll begin with Mrs. Carter's own words." The room became perfectly still. "If my family is hearing this letter," he read, "then someone has finally decided the abandoned mill has become valuable." Every eye shifted toward my father. Whitmore continued, "Richard has always admired what looks impressive. Loraine has always seen potential where others see failure. That is why Vanessa receives the villa she always loved, while Loraine receives the mill she alone will understand." Vanessa's confident smile faded. My father folded his arms. "This proves nothing." Whitmore nodded. "You're correct." He lifted another folder. "This does." He laid certified deeds across the conference table. Over the course of 28 years, Mrs. Carter quietly acquired every adjoining parcel surrounding the textile mill. One investor immediately leaned closer. Every parcel. Every parcel." The surveys were spread across the table. Gasps filled the room. The property extended far beyond the old brick buildings. It included future commercial development rights, river access easements, warehouse lots, and land already approved for mixed-use expansion. One investor quietly whispered to another, "I had no idea the holdings were this extensive." Neither had I. My mother hadn't simply left me an abandoned building. She had left me an entire future. Whitmore wasn't finished. "There is also one additional legal provision." He produced another notarized document. "This clause permanently removes Richard Carter from any authority involving these properties." My father's face changed instantly. "That's impossible." "It is legally binding," Whitmore replied. "You can't be serious." "I am." Whitmore adjusted his glasses before reading aloud. "Richard Carter shall possess no authority to manage, transfer, negotiate, mortgage, assign, or otherwise exercise control over the mill property or its associated holdings. Ownership shall remain solely with Loraine Carter unless she voluntarily chooses otherwise." Silence. Absolute silence. My father looked toward his own attorneys. One slowly closed his notebook. The other simply shook his head. "There is no legal avenue," one finally admitted. The documents are valid. Richard stared at him. There has to be something. There isn't. For the first time in my life, I watched my father realize that authority could not change facts. Vanessa suddenly pushed her chair back. You knew about this, she asked him. Richard began. You told me the property could be transferred. I believed. You promised it was already ours. I was trying to. You embarrassed me. She stood and looked toward me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly sat back down, unable to meet my eyes. The investors who had accompanied my father exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them stood. Mr. Carter, had we known you possessed no ownership rights, we never would have attended yesterday's meeting. Another nodded. This has damaged your credibility. Within minutes, they gathered their files and walked out. My father called after them. Wait. No one did. The relatives who had pressured me the previous day looked equally uncomfortable. My aunt slowly turned toward me. Loraine. I looked at her without speaking. We shouldn't have assumed. Another cousin sighed. You were telling the truth. Margaret quietly slid my mother's handwritten letter across the table. You should finish reading it. I unfolded the final page. The last paragraph blurred as tears filled my eyes. Loraine, if you're reading this, then you've already done what I always believed you would do. You built something instead of chasing appearances. Never measure your worth by who applauds you. Measure it by what remains after everyone else walks away. I closed my eyes for a moment. For years I had tried to earn my father's approval. My mother's words made me realize she had never expected me to. She had trusted me long before I trusted myself. A month later, the failed takeover had become common knowledge throughout the local business community. Several companies quietly stopped working with my father after learning he had attempted to pressure his own daughter into surrendering property he had never controlled. His reputation never fully recovered. Vanessa sold the beachfront villa within the year. We rarely spoke after that. Some relationships survive disappointment. Ours didn't survive betrayal. As for the mill, we expanded exactly as my mother had envisioned. The surrounding land became home to new artisan workshops, a technology incubator housed inside restored warehouses, landscaped public gardens along the river, and a preservation center that offered scholarships to engineering and architecture students interested in restoring historic buildings. Every scholarship carried my mother's name. Every graduating class learned her story. Visitors often ask why I never sold the property after it became so valuable. I simply smile and look across the courtyard, where families gather beneath the old brick walls, everyone once dismissed as worthless. Because the greatest thing my mother left me was never the land. It was the chance to discover that my value was never determined by the inheritance my family admired. It was determined by what I chose to build when everyone else had already given up. The abandoned mill my family called worthless didn't just become my fortune. It became the place where I finally stopped letting them decide my worth.